guys, I better get used to the caddies.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of At the Elephants. I'm your host, Rob Morris. Great show for you today. So excited to share this with you. I have Robert Bob Francesconi, the movement and mask teacher at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts Drama School, and I had such an incredible interview with him. I'm not just saying in quality, but the experience of talking to him. We met in, he calls it the den, the storage room upstairs, his second office, where he keeps all the masks and the fun toys that we play with. And we talked for almost 2 hours. It's going to have to be 2 episodes. This is going to be episode 1, episode 12, and then part 2 will feature a little later in the semester, probably farther along in this autumn. We had a great conversation that started with, kind of a trek through his personal story of how he came to be at NCSA. And, the second part of the interview, you'll notice, will focus more on his time at NCSA as a teacher. But I'm really incredibly excited to share this with you. Notoriously, Mr. Francesconi is a man of few words in most situations. Every now and then in class, he'll kind of get going to talk about a particular concept, or if you're in rehearsal with him. But for the most part, even in his class, there's not a lot of speech. So it was nice to really have an in-depth conversation with this guy, because he's got to be one of the most fascinating human beings I've ever met. He's also incredibly kind and humble. And you'll see that, or I should say hear that, in the interview that follows. I won't go on too far about it. I do want to say a couple of things really quick before we get into it that I hope all loyal listeners of the show will take to heart. First of all, we're transitioning a little bit from SoundCloud to YouTube. All of the episodes on the attheelephants.com blog website are now the YouTube links. The SoundCloud will still exist for the purposes of streaming this via the iTunes podcast app. You have to have some place to host that, and YouTube doesn't work for that. So, long story short, if you want to listen to it on the iTunes podcast app, that's still going to be an option. But if you're listening to it streaming, let's stream it from YouTube instead of SoundCloud for various reasons that I could talk about later. But, if you enjoy the interview, which I hope you do, please help me get this out to anybody that would be interested. Let your fellow alums know. If you're a student, let your parents know so that they can get to know your teachers and the other people who've gone to this fine institution. If you're just generally a fan and you think somebody else might appreciate the show, just spread it around. Help me out. I produce this entirely by myself. The music is contributed by others, Daniel Lamone and Max Tampa Brown, amongst others. And Dave Thomas Brown did the graphics for us for season 1 and season 2. But otherwise, all the editing and hauling the equipment around and recording and scheduling and all that's me. So the only thing that I ask from you, my listeners, is that you help me spread the word and help me get the word out on this passion project of mine that so far has been going pretty well. So I'm going to shut my mouth in a way for now and open it in just a few seconds so you can hear this delightful interview with a huge mentor and kind friend of mine, Bob Francesconi. Oh, and his chair is a little squeaky, but I know you'll forgive it. I start by asking everybody the same question. Where are you from?
I'm from Eureka, California.
Eureka?
Yes, from the heart of the Redwoods.
Oh, nice.
It's in Northern California, 300 miles north of San Francisco.
Gotcha.
About 150 miles south of the Oregon border.
How big of a town is Eureka?
How
big was it at the time?
I don't know. I think it was 24,000.
Oh, okay, so smaller for sure. You're not a big city guy originally.
No, in fact, it's the only city of that size in Humboldt County.
Oh, okay.
I went to school at Humboldt State. Eventually, I went other places first, and
Right.
that's in Arcata, which is a town of 9,000.
Wow. So how long was it until you lived in a city where there were, a reasonable amount of people, as we might consider it? Like, what was your first venture into, like, big city?
San Francisco.
And when did you go there?
I don't. Well, being from Eureka,
Right.
I grew up also traveling to San Francisco a lot.
Just like a lot in and around the Bay Area, there would be different things.
In the Bay Area, but we lived there permanently in 1970. We moved there, I think. It was just right at the end of the Flower Child thing. Since I grew up in Eureka, there's a lot of family there. In fact,
Right.
My dad still lives there, and my daughter lives there, and my grandchildren live there.
Right. So you're the one fella out on the East Coast, is that how it is?
Yeah, I'm the one.
Yeah, I know what that's like, actually.
It
All
took-
my family's in Texas, but it feels similar. I'm the
Yeah.
only one in my family on this side at all.
Yeah. My whole family, actually. My brother lives in Portland, Oregon. My sister lives in Sacramento, California. And and then my son lives in Portland. And so what you say is
Right.
everyone's West Coast.
Definitely,
And I'm
and Northwest in particular.
Yeah.
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 Nice.
There's a real prejudice between North and South.
In California,
Yeah.
over on the West Coast?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that there is. It's a very different vibe in the brief time I've spent out there. But, I mean,
Exactly.
you just hear about it. It's so different.
Yeah.
From Portland to L.A., it's
Yeah.
like, wow, that's a spectrum for sure.
Yes.
So I want to ask, because I just think this has just always interested me about you in general. When we're in your class and we're taking the masks to different places, a lot of them are places that, inspire us to feel, at least for me, I can only speak for myself, but very childlike. There's a lot of childlike places that I go with a lot of the masks, especially in the sense of exploration. And so I'm curious what it was like for you growing up when you were very young. I mean, what did you do in your free time when you weren't forced to go to school, were you running around in the redwoods? I mean, what'd you do for fun when you were like 7 years old?
I mean, I grew up normal.
What does that mean?
Well, it means I went hunting and fishing with my dad.
Right.
At a very young age.
Right.
I learned to shoot and hunt.
What did you like to hunt?
Well, we used to hunt deer.
Right. That's my family does that too.
Yeah. I prefer to fish.
Right.
To be honest. But I had a whole set of experiences, growing up that were always outside oriented.
Right.
Everything from sports as a kid, and grew up sports. And,
What kind of sports do you like when you were a kid?
baseball and football and
You played
basketball.
all three?
Yeah, yeah,
Were you any good?
yeah.
Yeah?
Actually,
All three?
yeah.
Nice.
And I carried that through in high school and all that. But because of the isolation of Eureka,
Right.
there was very easy access to the wilderness areas. We had a summer cabin in a place called Willow Creek. And if you recall, I don't know if I did it with your class, but I talked about finding a dead body.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where it occurred. And it was while I was fishing.
Wow.
I don't know if you recall.
How old were you when you found a dead body while you were fishing?
I was 21
Okay.
when I found that.
Sure.
And then, if you recall, I talked about the Hoopaw Indian Reservation.
Yeah, but pause for 1 second, because you have to tell me what the rest of the story about the dead body is. Like, what did you ever find out anything about it?
Yeah.
Like, what was the
I mean,
situation?
I found a great. The Northern California is.
Because I don't know if you know this, but I think very few of us in the world have found a dead body.
probably not, and probably
Right.
not under the circumstances that I found it.
Sure. So what was the deal?
Northern California is prone to floods. And in certain wilderness areas, you get flash flooding like you do anywhere else. So I was driving along this very small river called Willow Creek, actually. And I parked the car and I looked down and I had to actually climb down about 200 feet to get to the river.
Wow.
So it's it was in a gully.
Sure.
And I climbed down there, and when I got to the bottom, I smelled something. But what I thought it was a dead deer, because they're very prevalent along the rivers,
Right.
Especially after the winter rains and all that. So I thought nothing of it, and so I started fishing. And if you can picture the most picturesque area of a small river, trees overhanging, mossy rocks, and it's very rocky in Northern California, so the water is very clear.
Right.
And I was fishing along, and I just simply wanted to go to the other side.
Right.
And I climbed up onto a boulder, and I was about to jump down from the boulder when I saw an arm protruding from underneath the boulder. And it was a skeleton arm.
No skin, no muscle,
no skin.
nothing.
It was literally what you would see in the movies, actually.
Whoa.
And
Hand fully intact?
yeah.
Wow.
And I looked at that, and, I couldn't believe it. So I carefully climbed down from the boulder and looked at and discovered that there was a body there that was, one arm was extended, the other arm and leg were draped over a log. And the log itself had wedged under the boulder. And it was, the body was quite deteriorated.
Sure,
At that point. But it still had skin on it.
Oh, wow. Just not on the arms.
But on the torso.
Right.
And there was partial skin and on the head, and but it was leather colored, greenish, dark, and there were some remnants of clothing, and then the smell became very strong, but unlike the smell of a deer deteriorating,
Right.
what really attracted the smell became somewhat attractive. And what also became very attractive was the body itself. It wasn't a fearful thing.
Right.
I can't explain that sensation at all.
Sure.
It was entirely unexpected.
Uh-huh.
And I must have sat on a rock across from that body for maybe a half an hour.
Wow.
And, I don't know why I did the following thing, but I did. I picked up a little pebble and I threw it against the chest because I was curious if it would make a sound. And it did. It made a sound like a drum. And it just kind of reverberated. And then I thought, well, I better go report this. And so in Willow Creek, we have a summer cabin. That's where I also grew up in the summer times. You asked me what did I do for fun. We used to float rivers and kayaks and all of that kind of stuff.
Very summer camp things.
Yeah. And anyway, we were staying at our summer cabin, and so I drove back and told my dad. He didn't believe me.
Well, who would?
I know, but he didn't believe me. But he believed me enough that he wants to go see it before we call the highway patrol.
Right.
And so,
okay.
So we went back down there, and sure enough, and the highway patrol came, and then finally, in order to extract the body, the fire rescue were there and all that. It was quite a procedure because, as I said, it was 200 to 300 feet down.
Right.
And they had to put it in a cradle and hoist it up and all that. That I didn't know then, because you never know where your life's going to go.
Sure.
But that one experience has proved to be seminal in the neutral mask.
Right.
Because, you've heard me speak of contact, making contact
Right,
with
of
an
course.
individual.
That's what it feels like it's all about.
And I made contact with that body.
Right. Right.
And it opened up a whole nother thing. One of the things that it opened up, and I had the experience again when my mother died, but is that death is not, for me anyway, is not so scary.
It's so funny that you say that. Less than a year ago, I want to say it was this winter, I had a dream that really just, you have those dreams sometimes that just change your life because
Yeah.
you're confronted with some perspective that you couldn't find any other way. The dream was, I'm in a plane, it's nighttime, and it's raining, the worst time to be in a plane. Going through the sky, and in a big plane, I'm talking, not 747, but we're going across the country plane. 100 people on board or more. And all of a sudden we hit turbulence, the plane starts to go down, and it is a little, I can't think of the right filmmaker, but it goes slow motion.
Yeah.
We're listening to classical music, and it's all, it's all, it's like an aria's playing somewhere, and it becomes this thing where everybody's panicking, the lights are flashing, and everything externally for me was fear and it kind of started to wash over me, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so afraid. And then I hit the water. And as soon as the plane hit the water and I felt it, break apart and water start to rush in, all the fear went away.
Yeah.
Completely. And it was like, people die.
Mm-hmm.
There was something in me, and I had just experienced a death in my life in reality recently that I'm sure influenced it. But it was just this total sense of, when it happens, and that kind of like, it's not anything to be afraid of. And certainly in that situation, where you would have it's probably the least amount of control my brain could conjure. Was like, what is a death that you just, it doesn't matter what you think or what you're going to do or what you want, or, it's out of your control completely. And how do you deal with that? And, I think, 5 years, 10 years ago, that dream would have affected me very differently. But when I woke up from it, I was still very lucidly like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna sit around and make that part of what my life is about, worrying about that moment that I can't predict and probably not control.
Right. When my mother died, I was with her. She'd suffered with, she was afflicted with cancer, and we
When
knew
did she
that.
pass?
Pardon?
When did she pass?
I don't know. Quite a few years ago.
Okay.
Now, maybe 10, 11 years.
Sure.
We knew the end was coming.
Right.
And at that point, she had begun to slip into kind of a coma.
Right.
But and I remember precisely, I was sitting in a chair watching, and she just stopped breathing. She'd been breathing very heavily, and then she stopped. And my next thought was that the colors in the room became so vibrant. Everyone hears me talk about stillness and all of that, but that's what I found, what I experienced, absolute silence. And I say colors, it was a darkened room, much like our lighting in here, but everything became so vibrant.
I really thought you were going to say the opposite of that. Like when I heard that set up to what you're going to say, you're like, and the colors went so much duller, and yet you say vibrant. That's so interesting.
And the next day, the sun was so much brighter.
It carried over
the
that
air
sensation.
This may sound ridiculous, but
No.
the air was clearer and more vibrant.
Wow. What do you make of that?
I don't know. I don't know, but I do feel that I sense somehow a lifting of a presence.
Right.
And then, I'm not certain I experienced ultimate grief. I mean, because we knew it was going to happen.
Right, sure.
But the actual moment was more uplifting than depressing.
Interesting. And it seems like that really shocked you too at the time.
Yeah.
And
it
in
did.
retrospect even.
I mean, and it was. And I remember the time, I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning,
Wow.
when the event finally happened. So I don't know how we got on this subject exactly.
It really doesn't matter.
I mean, we got on it because we were
Right.
talking about the dead body.
Right.
It's so interesting that on the day that I found that dead body, another body was found by someone else about 100 miles away, but this body was up in a tree. And these were all flood victims.
Right. Not foul play of any kind. It's
No.
just totally random.
And it the flood occurred in the wintertime, and I found the body in the summer. There's, I guess in my life, I'm somewhat fortunate in that I've always had an opportunity to be with nature.
Yeah.
And when I'm not, I get a little antsy.
Sure.
It's one of the nice things about North Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
Although here it's so civilized from where I came from.
What do you mean? Like nature is more civilized?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Everything is farmed. Everything is,
Less wild nature.
yeah.
Gotcha.
And when you step into a redwood forest, again, this may become a theme I'm thinking of. The silence of a redwood forest hurts your ears. The reason being there are no bugs. And because there's no bugs, there's no birds.
Why are there no bugs?
The bark is toxic.
I had no idea.
I mean, there's things in the ground and all of that, but
But the volume, as if you were in like a jungle, it's like the exact opposite.
it's the exact opposite. And you use redwood bark when you could still farm and cut.
Sure, it's like a
redwoods.
natural pesticide.
They spread it they used to spread it on the ground all the time.
Right. I had no idea. That's crazy. So, yeah. So in a weird way, I feel like that explains your thematic silence a little bit. You're kind of born into the silence of the redwood forest.
Yeah, I actually.
That's got to affect you. I mean, it clearly has.
does. My grandson, who has become a major painter, and he's only 16. He's had a couple shows now, and
Right.
and he's but he said something to me that sticks with me. I have all these thoughts banging around in my head, and I did spend a bit of time alone, and as a kid growing up, and there were a lot of thoughts.
Your
banging.
siblings?
Yeah. They were a little younger,
Right.
and we were always going separate ways. But
Were you Robert when you were a kid?
no,
Were you Bobby? Were you Bob? You can call a little kid Bob.
my mother called me Bobby, but everyone else called me Bob.
From really young?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So then what took you into the things that you do?
That's where the long story is. I don't know if it'll be interesting, but what the
I
heck.
feel like there's a reasonable amount of people who'd be interested to hear it.
Well, when I graduated high school,
Mind if I ask what year?
yeah, 1966.
Gotcha.
When I graduated high school, I had a real interest, and still do, in flying.
Wanted to do that my whole life.
And I picked Loyola University in Los Angeles to go to. And I also, truthfully, am very interested in science.
That's a recipe for an astronaut or a...
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And so I went to Loyola for mechanical engineering.
Ideal.
And they also have officer training program for the Air Force.
I did that in high school.
Did you?
Yeah.
And I started flight training in my first year. We flew, I mean, I didn't, but they flew us out to I forget what, Air Force Base in Arizona. And
Sure.
we started, just some of the basic stuff. So I was on a totally different trajectory.
Sure.
But I've always was interested in the arts.
Yeah.
And I was specifically interested in Shakespeare because our high school used to do all kinds of Shakespeare stuff.
Oh, okay.
But I went to Loyola for mechanical engineering. It wasn't too much into the program that I realized that I wasn't very good at calculus, nor was I very interested.
Gotcha.
So I got uneasy. At the same time I was at Loyola, their theater department, being in Los Angeles, was really quite dynamic.
Sure.
And they were doing a production.
This is in the late 60s?
Yeah. They were doing a production of Servant of Two Masters. And
Which you've become a little more familiar with since then.
Yeah.
Right.
But they did Servant of Two Masters, and it was the first time I saw masks used on stage.
How were they?
At the time, I thought they were quite good. And the person playing Arlecchino was terrific. And I went to every performance. And then right after that, they did Man for All Seasons. And again, I went to every performance. And then I began to decide, well, I'm probably in the wrong place. So I transferred to Humboldt State the next year. Humboldt State has one of the most developed, at the time, the theater programs on the West Coast, and it had one of the best equipped theaters on the West Coast. They specialized in experimental theater.
Right.
And
what a time for that.
Yeah. I'll probably get to that in a second, how I was directly influenced. But I didn't transfer to go into theater. I transferred to go into biology because I was also interested in pre-med.
So you're thinking astronaut, doctor. All right, that's the path we're on so far.
Yeah, and I'm pretty good at biology, zoology, and all that kind of stuff. I was horrible at organic chemistry.
Oh, no.
But
you
because
keep
it's all
having these Achilles heels in the fields that you want.
I still have dreams of not passing calculus.
Like you have nightmares where you're at the test?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, they're going to come find me out. But at Humboldt, you had to take a series of arts courses. And the one I chose was theater appreciation. And I showed up for the first class, and I was fascinated by the teacher, who was an Englishman, Philip Mann. And he just opened my eyes just completely to the possibilities of theater. And it wasn't really an acting class as much as a survey kind of class, but it was held in a Quonset hut. And it was all decorated with rugs on the walls, and it was typical 1960s stuff.
Paint me jealous.
And we did actually, it became an acting class as such, and I really enjoyed it actually. And he and I got acquainted, and he asked me to audition for his production of Macbeth, which I did. And I didn't think I was going to even be looked at. And he cast me as one of the witches.
Just give me a second. I just have to visualize my own version, and then you can tell me about what you did. Okay, go ahead.
Well, there's not much to say beyond that. It was an innovative production, to say the least, because it was all male.
Witches,
basically. And
right.
It was, and they.
You had a male like Lady Macbeth, or just the witches were?
No, just the witches.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
The witches. And
so how'd they do that? What was their like spin other than it being men?
It was kind of like universal beings.
Gotcha.
But there was a lot of fabric on them.
Sure.
There wasn't
something just otherworldly.
Yeah, very little makeup actually with it. And after I got cast, I made a decision. This is what I probably should be doing.
You got cast as a witch in one Shakespeare play, and you were like, forget the astronaut and the doctor thing.
Yeah. And simultaneous with that, I grew acquainted with a lot of people there at Humboldt, very dynamic people. And then the director of the program, Richard Rothrock, at the time, took a liking to what I was doing and that. And I got exposed to the kind of training you get here, not as in depth.
Sure.
But it had one vital thing that that a place like School of the Arts cannot have. And that is a place where students could do their own work.
Mm.
And it wasn't like Keys to the Kingdom, although it's kind of the same idea.
Right. What's the difference?
The difference was it was throughout the school. I mean, it was throughout the theater program, and we had both faculty-directed shows and student-directed shows going on all at the same time.
There was no real differentiation between, there's just a bunch of productions.
Yeah,
in that regard.
And it's not there wasn't a through line like there is here to the training.
Right.
So
each year, did they kind of change some stuff up and offer different courses, and you could just kind of could you choose just whatever you wanted to take within that program, like a regular lib arts?
Choose, and then you had to fulfill requirements to get the degree.
Right, sure.
But it's not as structured as here. But in that experimental wing of the theater program, they had a heavy emphasis in movement.
Mm.
And I, coming from an athletic background, found that this was kind of easy and interesting to me. It just so happens that at that same time, my future partner, James Donlan, who was a basketball player at Humboldt, had to take a theater class. It happened to be that same theater appreciation class.
Wow.
We got to know each other in Macbeth. And
he was in Macbeth too? Who was he?
I can't recall. He wasn't a witch. He was one of the characters.
One of those fellas.
Yeah.
One of those guys.
And
there's so many guys in that play.
He swung a sword a lot. That's
there you go. Okay, sure.
Okay.
That narrows it down.
Yeah.
He's the one who came here a few years ago that I saw perform.
Right.
Oh, my goodness. In Catawba.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And he and I got to know each other, and we both auditioned for a very special movement class. It was taught by Yas Hakashima, a Japanese mime artist. And he had an Eastern style, not a French style. And and Jim and I were really good at this.
Was this a very comedic mime, the Eastern mime?
No, it's quite the opposite.
Gotcha. I had an inkling it was not necessarily humorous.
No, it's just the opposite. And that's what was interesting to us. And we did eventually do a show with Yas Hakashima. Now think back to where we live.
Here in Winston?
No, Eureka.
Oh,
Eureka,
gotcha.
Arcata,
okay.
Isolated.
Right.
So Jim and I got to thinking, well, we can do anything if we want to.
Right. Sure.
So we said, hey, let's do a show, a movement-oriented show.
Sure.
And we did.
And what year is this?
This would be 68, 67, 68.
Gotcha.
I think around in there.
Yeah.
Over a long, and we created an hour and a half concert version of a movement show that was both comic and quite serious.
Huh.
One of the pieces that we created was a piece called The Game. It was about two brothers who grew up together. I remember vividly it started with us playing ball, and then it began to evolve. And gradually you realize that these two brothers have changed, and they're marching through the woods. They're through a jungle, actually. And one is chasing the other. And it becomes an allegory on war. Two soldiers in war.
A subject that comes up in quite a few plays that you direct here.
Yeah, it does.
At least since I've been here.
Yeah. And, well, this was the height of the Vietnam War.
Right, of course.
And I don't know if you know, but at one point, all of the state university campuses in California were shut down by the students.
I didn't know that.
As part of the protest.
Right, of course.
So I think we're really talking about 68.
Right.
Because that's when Kent State occurred. The shooting in Kent State and the riots in Chicago at the Democratic Convention. And because we had gotten a reputation, we were asked by the protest committee to present The Game as part of the protest movement there at Humboldt.
Gotcha.
And we did, and we got fabulous feedback. Of course we would, because it's a liberal campus.
And it was the perfect thing that they needed to see. And,
And all of that.
Sure.
Well, that finally subsided a little bit, and I think within a few months, we had this show, and we were asked to bring it to the Northwest Drama Conference up in Portland. That's where various colleges and universities present for competition, essentially, plays to be judged for the American Theater Festival.
Gotcha.
Well, we got a special dispensation because we weren't interested in the theater festival. We just wanted to present
the piece.
The piece. Right. And we did. It just so happens that a New York critic called Ted Mann, Theodore Mann, was in the audience, and he wrote us up in Critical Digest. And from that moment, our name became known.
Wow.
Nationwide. We began touring nationally, and since at heart both James and I are teachers, we began teaching workshops.
On the style that you had kind of developed. Of
exactly.
This
Exactly.
Eastern and
so we would teach workshops, do the concert, and then move on to another school. And again, we developed an interesting following, and we were invited to the International Mime Festival.
Which parts of what you teach now are really, when you do them and you go, because I know you go through a lot of the same exercises, and I know it's evolved a lot even recently. It's always still evolving. But what exercises or what parts of different things do you do that you're like, man, that's the original stuff? That's like stuff we were doing in the early days.
A lot of it.
Is a lot of it really just, based on that original kind of workshop concept?
No, on a point of view.
Gotcha.
It's based on a point of view. Remind me to get back to the International Mime Festival.
Yeah, I will.
Because that was a real shift in us. But in what you just asked, I used to, in order to make money,
right.
I never waited tables, but to make money, I always taught. And
right.
I taught specialty workshops. So I started out in preschool.
Yeah.
Then I moved on to elementary school.
Right.
As an arts teacher.
Sure.
asked to do middle school, which I hated.
Oh, middle school's my favorite.
Oh, I just hated it.
Everybody says that. I don't know why, but it's my favorite
I had
group.
a real difficulty. But then I was asked to do workshops in high school.
And you were like, these are people who've decided they really care about this.
Yeah, and then that I really liked that. But simultaneous with that, I did this when I was still in high school. I worked for the Parks and Recreation Department in Eureka City, and I was a creative dramatics director.
What does that mean? For
Creative
Parks and Rec?
Yeah,
What
for
does
Parks.
that mean? Creative what?
Creative dramatics.
Creative dramatics.
Yeah, it's using theater to teach kids,
You're
basically.
doing like community programs
Yeah.
where you put on something and you're helping kids learn
Yeah,
about
it's
something.
not much
Yeah.
different than acting out,
Right. Yeah,
except it was sponsored by the city.
for sure. Some of the stuff Peppercorn does is in that same vein
Yeah.
of using that
Yeah.
medium to teach.
And because I was dealing with kids, I developed a way of working.
Right.
Some of the stuff, before we actually start class, the running around or the circle games.
That's like the little kid stuff.
that came from there.
Right.
When I had to find and keep an audience interested.
Has the clap always worked?
Yeah.
I'd imagine so.
Yeah, it always does. And
When I got back in class the other day, I had this moment where I was like, I forget how this all starts. It was like a brief second, but I was like, wait, what's going to happen? I forgot, and I panicked, and then I saw your hands go up, and I was like, oh, I felt so safe, because I remembered that that's what we're going to do.
yeah. But from the time that Jim and I started working, and from college, we developed a point of view and a way of working. And part of that way of working is that the teaching process is always in evolution. Now, that's really more my thing. I haven't talked to Jim in a long time about that, but I was saying, you're always evolving it. So I know what's going to happen, but I don't know how you're going to influence it to make it happen.
Huh.
And that is that constant evolution.
Right.
I think you know that I keep records of each class that I've taught. Now they're going back here 38 years.
Wow.
I don't.
You have 38 years of records of every class you've taught at this school.
Yeah.
And what do? You do like a paragraph on each one? Or like how? What are your?
No, I list the exercises.
Okay.
I list the exercise in somewhat detail,
Right.
and then I make notes to myself. This worked. This did not work.
Gotcha.
Or I note where it's changed from the year before.
Gotcha.
And the reason why it's changed. The last few years, I've been going through enormous evolution. And again, the students are different than they were 38 years ago.
Sure, I'm sure they are.
And so that has caused what I do to be a little bit different.
Right.
And of course, the god-awful semester system has a little bit to do with it also.
Of course. I was here right smack dab in the middle of that change.
Oh, yeah.
I felt so bad because I know you did so much of that, trying to make 3 fit into 2,
Yeah.
and that's just difficult math.
Yeah.
You don't have to be good at calculus for that to be really difficult, even if you are.
So I have a long history of movement-oriented things.
Right.
At the International Mime Festival, I think it was the one in 1972.
And it's held.
This one was held in Wisconsin, actually,
Gotcha.
in Milwaukee, and it was a major event. I was amazed.
How many people turn out for an international mime festival?
Well, worldwide, it was. I don't know. It's just
Wow.
a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
And they have guest performances and all that. And James and I were asked
Right.
to perform.
That's great.
And I was asked to teach because the head of it also knew me from my work in creative drama.
Uh-huh.
We did several drama conferences in Chicago and all that, and that's how all this came about.
Right.
And he asked me to do a special workshop at the festival in working with teachers.
Teaching teachers.
Teaching teachers. And
And how old are you at this point?
fairly young.
Yeah, I'm doing the math in my head, and you're teaching teachers in your late 20s?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was that. And
So you must have been pretty good.
or I didn't know I wasn't.
Yeah.
But now this is so interesting to me. And in the room next door, in the studio next door, not here, but,
Right. The one you teach in.
In the room at the International,
Oh, at the next door. Okay, gotcha.
right next door was Jacques Lecoq.
Wow.
He was also doing a specialized workshop.
Wow, that's crazy.
And we got to know of each other then. If we skip ahead to 1991, I was invited to the International Movement Symposium in Moscow.
It's like almost 25 years later, 24 years later.
Yeah. Tanya was part of this.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I did a special demonstration at the Moscow Art Theater with American students that we brought over.
Right.
We did a presentation over there. And
That class came back while I was at school here, and
Yeah,
during the talk back, we discussed that a lot.
and they're coming back again.
Oh, were they really?
In October.
Oh, nice. 25?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And we did basically a demonstration of the mask, much like I do here,
Mm-hmm.
and I followed Jacques Lecoq,
Wow.
except what we were doing was great, was appreciated more.
Gotcha.
It-
Wow.
It was just so ironic.
That's so crazy.
Because he
you just
actually,
keep ending up right next to this guy.
yeah, and he comes from a different tradition.
Right.
I come from no tradition, because I'm self-taught.
Right.
I really didn't have.
Just you and your buddy who kind of made it up.
We make it up, yeah.
Right.
And then being 38 years here at the School of the Arts,
Right.
I have a playground in which to grow it.
Yeah.
And really solidify what I do. Going back to the 72 Mime Festival,
Uh-huh.
You've heard of the group named Movement Shots?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of their stuff from the Muppet Show, right? Muppet Show? Something
Well,
like
they
that.
could be.
They were on it a few times, I think.
The Movement Shots is a troupe that regenerates itself. So the original members of Movement Shots are no longer part of it.
Sure.
It's a franchise.
Right.
But
Kind of like the Blue Man Group.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But weird to think they're the same people. They're
Yeah.
the same things.
Yeah. But Movement Shots came to this country for the first time there.
They Swedish?
Italian.
Italian.
I can speak a little Italian.
Okay.
They could speak no English. I got to know them.
Wow.
And honest to God, this was my really first exposure to the possibilities of the theatrical mask and what it could do. Did you see the one where the clay faces
I
stretch?
love that one with the bird. They turn into like big bird
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
yeah, so cool. They like smash their faces together.
Yeah, they first did that in '72, and I saw that. It changed. It really did change my direction and James's direction to
Yeah.
increase possibilities. We eventually ended up in San Francisco, he and I, and we opened a studio there, and we stayed a couple of years there, and then life intrudes.
Sure.
We both had families, and so I ended up teaching in Columbia College in Sonora, California, up in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Jim did some specialty workshops. I'm not certain where, but the important thing is he applied for a job in North Carolina.
Jim did.
Yeah,
When?
a long time ago.
Right. Right.
I think it was 1976.
Gotcha.
And
Where in North Carolina?
Here.
Really? He applied for a job at NCSA?
Yeah.
Your job?
No,
Which job?
I wasn't here yet.
I know, but the job that you now have, was he applying for that movement teacher role?
It was
or
entirely different.
Okay.
So, yes, he applied to be a movement teacher here.
Right.
And Malcolm Morrison was
Right.
the first real dean here. And Malcolm saw the value of a theater movement in an acting program.
Right.
And he brought Jim in. Jim didn't do masks at that time.
Right.
And actually didn't. He did just general, kind of like my movement class. And Jim told me that there was going to be another job opening, and he said, "Why don't you just think about it?" Well, I never got a chance to think about it, because within a few days, at 7 o'clock in the morning, Malcolm called me. And I didn't know who this person was. I only knew Jim was vaguely out there in North Carolina.
Right.
And Malcolm, an Englishman, I was intrigued, said, "I would like you to come to North Carolina and do a workshop." This was in May of 1978.
Gotcha.
And I said, okay. Now, I'm from California. This is North Carolina.
Right.
We have gone through racial desegregation.
Right.
And just think of all of the prejudice that Californians have against the South.
Right.
I mean, it's just one of those things.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't really prejudiced against the South, but I was a little uneasy.
Right. You thought of it as a more hostile place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's one thing that I've always liked about the South, which is
Yeah.
NASCAR racing.
I do know that about you. And so you thought I'll be safe because they go around the track out there.
They go around the track, and I was...
You can count on those left turns.
Yeah.
That will not change.
That will not change. And so I know it wasn't really that bad place.
So you're like, they're not so bad.
Right. And so I came in 1978. I did a workshop with this was the first exposure of my masks to NCSA. It was the white masks that I did.
Mm-hmm.
In that graduating class, I did it with the third-year class. And there was a man by the name of Jim Lauderdale, who, if you look up, he's a graduate of and he's a major country star at Bluegrass, and he is now. He used it's Mask 43, which is one of the smiling.
I know exactly. It's the one with the circular eyes.
Yeah.
It's got circles like this, and it's like kind of big like that.
No, it's not that one. It's the one that's more realistic.
This is a great conversation for a radio show.
Yeah.
No, it's this one. You know, like this. You can see.
You're making me laugh.
I'm sorry. I'll stop.
Anyway, he used Mask 43. If you come to class again,
Sure.
I'll point it out to you.
I'll take a picture of it. I'll put it on the web.
Yeah, and it stuck with me because he used it so well. And Malcolm observed the class, and he asked me prior to leaving, going back to California, he said, "Would you like to have a job?" And I said, "I think so." In those days, there were no job applications. There was no search process. There was no anything. The dean had total control.
Come on down, teach a class, we'll cut you a check.
Yeah, and he, I talked with my wife, and we had 2 kids at the time, and we decided to try it, thinking I'd only be here a year.
Well, sometimes people are wrong about things, Bob.
Yeah, but it's such a seductive place.
Yes, it is.
As I heard you explain.
So I've been reading about nameless things. Don't ask me what they are.